What would you say if I told you that a lion, a fierce predator of the wild, could feel the loss of a human like a family member? Sounds like something out of a fairy tale, right? But in the heart of Tanzania's Serengeti, an incredible story unfolded that will challenge everything you think you know about the bond between animals and humans. A retired ranger, known for his compassion and devotion to wildlife, passes away. Yet, in an unexpected twist, it's not his family or fellow rangers who gather to pay respects. It's a lion, a creature he once saved from the brink of death. What follows is an emotional, awe-inspiring tale of loyalty, love, and the animal miracles that often go unnoticed in our everyday lives. Are you ready to discover how this lion showed up? Not just to mourn, but to honor the man who gave him a second chance at life? Out in the heart of Tanzania's golden grasslands, where time seems to slow and every breath carries the rhythm of nature, lived a man named Mr. McCond. He wasn't just any ranger, he was the ranger, a walking legend in boots worn from decades of patrolling the Serengeti. 50 years under the blazing sun and the star-strewn skies, protecting the wild as though it were his very own heartbeat. While others his age were tending gardens or sipping tea, he was still guiding young recruits, passing down hard-earned wisdom like sacred scrolls. He knew the language of the land, the rustle of the bush, the warning call of the birds, the silent stare of a lion at dusk. And when it came to stray animals injured or abandoned, McCond had a sixth sense. He'd spot a wounded paw from a mile away. Over the years, countless animal rescue stories unfolded under his watch. From heroic pets to miraculous recoveries, he was the quiet force behind it all. To the community, he wasn't just a mentor. He was a symbol of hope, proof that one man could make a difference. There's something special about a soul who continues to serve long after duty calls. Even in retirement, McCond rose with the sun, walking the trails like clockwork. He checked watering holes, tracked endangered species, and helped manage pet adoption programs for rescued wildlife that couldn't return to the wild. His hands, weathered and strong, had saved more lives, human and animal, than anyone could count. He carried the stories of pet heroes and survival like badges on his chest. But perhaps his greatest legacy wasn't just in what he did, but in what he inspired. Young rangers hung on every word he spoke. He'd often say, "If you listen carefully, the animals will teach you everything you need to know about loyalty, survival, and love." He spoke with the certainty of someone who had seen a lion mourn, a dog protect its injured sibling, a rescued elephant return to say thanks. He had lived and breathed emotional pet stories every single day, and each tale added another layer to his wisdom. Yet, as time marched on, even the strongest lions began to feel the weight of age. And though McCond never said it out loud, there were days his hands trembled a bit more and his steps slowed just enough to hint at something unspoken. But even then, there was no stopping him, because sometimes the heart leads where the body can't keep up. And it was on one of those sun-scorched mornings, as the earth shimmered under the heat, that the Serengeti prepared to teach its most powerful lesson yet. The morning sun hadn't even reached its peak, yet the air already clung heavy to the skin. It was one of those unforgiving days in the Serengeti where the heat seems to hum, a warning in itself. Mr. McCond, ever dedicated, was making his way to check on an injured rhino that had been reported limping near the riverbed. Even at his age, he refused to let others go in his place. "If they need help, I'll be there," he always said. That day was no different, except something about his walk seemed slower, his breaths a touch more labored. The rhino was there, wounded, confused, but alive. A victim of yet another brutal snare meant for bushmeat, a tragedy McCond had seen far too many times. As he approached, the dust curling up from the ground and the heat bearing down like a hammer, something gave way. A sharp pain in his chest stole his breath. He stumbled once, then again, and before he could even reach his emergency radio, he collapsed beside the very creature he came to save. It was as if nature herself was weeping, one of her fiercest protectors brought down in the very act of compassion. Back at camp, Time stretched unbearably long before someone realized he hadn't checked in. When Elijah and Musa, his closest colleagues, found him, the sight shattered them. They'd seen him brave everything: storms, poachers, wildfires, but nothing could prepare them for this. The old ranger, the keeper of countless animal rescue stories, lay still in the dust. And the cruel irony? He had forgotten his heart medication that morning. Just one small oversight in decades of service, and now the very rhythm of the Serengeti had paused. There were no sirens, no ambulances racing across the plains. Only the quiet hum of insects and the slow, unbearable realization that they were too late. Emergency responders arrived eventually, but it was more ceremony than salvation. The rhino was sedated and treated, but the man who came to help never got to see that miracle unfold. It was a cruel twist in a life defined by rescuing others. But sometimes even heroes fall, and in the silence that followed, the wild itself seemed to hold its breath for what was about to come next. Elijah and Musa had known Makan for years, watched him navigate life with the calm of a lion and the stubbornness of a buffalo. When they heard he hadn't checked in, their instincts kicked in fast. Grabbing their gear, they set off on foot, praying it was just a broken radio or a flat tire. But deep down, they knew something was off. The man never missed a check-in, not even during thunderstorms or wildlife encounters. And when they spotted his hat in the dirt before they saw him, their worst fears were confirmed. They found him lying in the dust, one hand still outstretched toward the rhino, the other clenched against his chest. His eyes were closed, and though his pulse flickered faintly, time was slipping away. Musa called for help while Elijah knelt beside him, whispering his name like it might anchor him to this world. But as the minutes dragged and the radio crackled with static, the truth loomed heavy. Makan had left his heart pills behind that morning. It was so unlike him. He who always carried supplies, always prepared. But even giants have their blind spots. The emergency team, delayed by distance and the brutal heat, arrived too late. CPR, oxygen, prayers, they tried everything. But nature had already reclaimed him. Elijah stood silent, fists clenched, heartbreaking. Musa wept openly, head bowed under the weight of helplessness. They had seen many things in their time. Rescued dogs trembling in cages, heroic pets standing guard over fallen friends. But this hit different. This was the fall of a legend. A man who had spent his life telling animal rescue stories, now had become one. Word of his passing rippled through the reserve like thunder. The rangers, the villagers, even the animals seemed quieter that evening. It wasn't just grief. They were mourning a legacy, a bond that ran deeper than words. But no one could have guessed what would happen next, something so profound, so impossible, that even the most seasoned among them would find their beliefs shaken, and their hearts cracked wide open. The sun hadn't even risen the next day, yet the reserve already felt different, hollow, almost like it knew. Word of Mr. Makan's death traveled faster than the wind. Rangers, veterinarians, even tourists who had once met him on guided treks stood in stunned silence. He wasn't just a man in uniform. He was the soul of the Serengeti. Grief swept through the reserve like a storm. People spoke in hushed tones, as if the animals might be listening too, mourning with them. And maybe, just maybe, they were. Elijah, who knew Makan's heart better than anyone, stepped up to honor his mentor's final wish. Let me be buried under the acacia, near the watering hole. Let nature decide who visits. It was the most Makan thing ever. No marble tomb, no city cemetery, just earth, sky, and the creatures he loved. Preparations for a traditional funeral began immediately. Locals brought handcrafted cloth, and young rangers constructed a ceremonial bed of woven branches. Even rescued dogs from nearby shelters were brought in to pay respect. They were part of his legacy too, living, breathing pet survival stories. As word spread beyond the reserve, messages poured in from all over the country. Organizations that worked with Makan on dog rescue missions, emotional pet stories, and animal miracles sent heartfelt tributes. Some spoke of the time he carried a wounded leopard cub for 10 miles. Others remembered the orphaned baby zebra he bottle-fed back to life. The stories were endless, and each one felt like another heartbeat added to his legend. It wasn't just a funeral, it was the farewell of a hero. And so, as the day of the ceremony approached, the land held its breath. People gathered, rangers in uniform, elders in ceremonial robes, children holding hand-painted signs that read Asante Makand. The air was thick with reverence, sorrow, and something else, something ancient. Little did they know that this would be no ordinary goodbye, for out beyond the horizon, the wild had already begun to stir, preparing its own tribute. And what came next would etch itself in a memory forever. It started with a murmur, someone at the edge of the gathering pointing toward the tall grasses. "Simba!" They whispered, their voice barely more than breath. Heads turned, and suddenly, silence fell like a curtain. Out from the golden veil of savannah emerged a lion. Not just any lion, but a massive male with a scar across his flank and eyes that carried the weight of memory. No one moved. No one dared speak. The timing, the place, it couldn't be coincidence. This was something else, something sacred. The lion walked slowly, deliberately, as though each step held purpose. The crowd parted in stunned reverence, unsure whether to run or remain frozen. But the lion didn't growl, didn't roar. He simply approached the funeral bed where Makand's body lay, wrapped in traditional cloth and surrounded by the symbols of his life. Then, in a gesture that defied every known boundary between man and beast, the lion stood still. He lowered his head, not in submission, but in respect. And for a long, haunting moment, he just stayed there. People began to weep. This wasn't fear. It was something far deeper. Some clutched their hearts. Others dropped to their knees. They had heard of heroic pets, of rescue animals who returned to say goodbye. But this was a wild lion, untamed, free, and yet, in his presence, it felt like they were in a temple. The lines blurred between myth and truth, between animal and man. Even the most skeptical among them, those who rolled their eyes at emotional pet stories, felt the sting of tears they couldn't explain. Elijah stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the lion's. "It's him," he murmured to Musa, "the one we saved." And suddenly, it all made sense. 15 years ago, in a story nearly forgotten by most, Makand had helped rescue a young lion caught in a poacher's trap. He'd cleaned its wounds, fed it, and then released it into the wild. Everyone assumed it would disappear forever. But here it was at his funeral, and the weight of what that meant was only just beginning to settle on the hearts of everyone present. 15 years earlier, in the heat of a dry season afternoon, a distress call had come in. Reports of a lion caught in a snare near the park's southern ridge. It wasn't the first time. Poachers had become a cancer on the land, leaving traps meant for profit, with no regard for the lives they shattered. When Makand and Elijah arrived, they found a young male, barely full-grown, thrashing and bleeding. Fear and rage danced in his eyes. He was a stray animal in every sense, wounded, abandoned by the wild, and close to death. Most would have kept their distance. But Makand? He approached slowly, whispering as he moved, as if the lion might understand him. Elijah recalled how his mentor had crouched beside the animal, cut the wire from its flesh, and pressed herbs to the wounds like an old healer from some forgotten legend. For days, they fed it by hand, cleaned its injuries, and slept with one eye open. They didn't just rescue an animal. They nursed back a piece of the Serengeti soul. And when it was strong enough to stand again, they released him near the same acacia where the funeral now stood. Elijah never forgot that lion. He had a scar shaped like a crescent moon on his left shoulder, a permanent reminder of both pain and survival. And now, here he was, years older, his mane full, his presence regal, standing beside Makand like a silent sentinel. No chains, no fear, no need for words. Just that unspoken connection forged through compassion, suffering, and healing. It was a reunion no one could have predicted. A miracle tucked into the folds of grief. For those gathered, it shifted everything. The lion wasn't just a symbol. He was living proof of the legacy Macan left behind. He was the embodiment of every pet adoption, every animal rescue story, every heroic pet that defied the odds. And even though the elder ranger's body lay still, his spirit was alive in the eyes of the creature beside him. But the lion's presence wasn't over yet, because what he did next would send shivers through the entire crowd. At first, no one dared get close. After all, this was a wild lion, an apex predator. But as the minutes passed and the creature didn't budge, something shifted. His calm was disarming. There was no growling, no flex of muscle to intimidate, just stillness, the kind of stillness that carried meaning. Slowly, like children stepping into water for the first time, the crowd inched forward. They began to circle the funeral bed, not out of duty, but out of awe. What they were witnessing didn't belong in a textbook. It belonged in the kind of stories that people passed down for generations. Some of the elders began to chant, their voices low and reverent, blending with the rustle of the savanna wind. A child held her mother's hand and whispered, "Is he saying goodbye?" And truly, that's what it looked like. The lion's massive head lowered again. He sniffed the earth. He closed his eyes for a moment. A brief, sacred pause. Then he let out a soft exhale, less of sound, more of a release. A farewell. And just like that, fear gave way to something else entirely. Reverence. Elijah, now openly crying, placed a small wooden carving of a lion at Macan's feet, a memento of the rescue years ago. Others followed, leaving tokens of gratitude, collars from adopted dogs, photos of rescued animals, notes of thanks for volunteers. These weren't just gestures. They were pieces of a greater narrative. Stories of pet heroes, stray animals given second chances, and emotional pet stories that echoed through the years, all sparked by one man's relentless heart, and now, somehow, carried forward by a lion. What none of them expected was how unified they would feel in that moment. Rangers, villagers, tourists, even the skeptical outsiders, they were no longer just observers. They had become participants in something transcendent. And as they stood shoulder to shoulder, united by grief and wonder, a quiet understanding passed between them. This wasn't the end of story. It was a passage, a transition, and the lion, who had one more role to play, wasn't finished yet. As the funeral procession began, there was a shift in the air, heavy, yet unexplainable. The lion didn't leave. He didn't return to the wild or vanish into the shadows like most might have expected. Instead, he walked behind the crowd, silent and solemn, with a grace that seemed almost deliberate. His massive paws left deep prints in the earth, mirroring the trail of memories left behind by Macan. It was as if he had made a vow to follow, to protect, to honor the man who had saved him. The journey to the burial site was long, winding through the familiar terrain Macan had once roamed so freely. With each step, the lion's presence was a reminder, not just of the man who had healed him, but of the deep connection that exists between humanity and the wild. The crowd, at first hesitant, now followed in quiet reverence, feeling a shared bond with the animal that no words could express. They could feel it, the same pulse that ran through the earth, that ran through the very soul of the Serengeti. It was a quiet, mutual understanding that was as old as time. When they reached the site, the lion stopped. He stood at the edge of the small clearing, gazing silently at Macan's grave. And then, for the first time since his arrival, the lion roared, a sound that split the quiet of the savannah like a thunderclap. It wasn't a roar of dominance or aggression. It was sorrow. It was a grieving cry that shook the hearts of everyone present. Some people turned away, wiping their eyes, unable to hold back their tears. This was not just a lion mourning a man. This was the embodiment of a sacred bond that transcended species. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the lion remained, his head held high and his gaze fixed on the spot where Macan's body had been laid to rest. And though the funeral was over, the lion's vigil had only just begun. For in the days to come, the visitors of the Serengeti would find him again, sitting by the grave, proof of a bond that couldn't be severed by time or death. And though the land may have claimed the ranger's body, it had not claimed his legacy. Not yet. Not ever. Days passed, and the Serengeti, with its endless horizon, began to return to its rhythm. But there was something different now, something unmistakable. The lion had become a quiet sentinel of the grave. At dawn, when the first light kissed the earth, he would appear, walking slowly from the edge of the reserve. His powerful form would move with a sense of purpose, as though he had a calling, an invisible tether pulling him to a place he knew all too well. The same place where he had first found sanctuary all those years ago. At first, the rangers couldn't believe their eyes. Some thought it was just a coincidence, a curious behavior driven by the wild instincts of a predator. But soon, it became clear the lion was remembering. He wasn't just wandering the land. He was honoring a bond so deep, so inexplicable, that it defied logic. The lion would sit by the grave, his massive body stretched out on the earth, his eyes closed as though in quiet reflection. And there, beneath the shadow of the acacia, he seemed to find solace in his own way, by simply being present. Soon, visitors to the reserve began to notice as well. Tourists who had heard the story of the lion's tribute found themselves captivated by the sight of him sitting so still, so patiently, day after day. They would stop their jeeps at the edge of the clearing and gaze in awe. Some whispered stories of their own. A stray dog saved from a burning building, a cat rescued from storm drain. And in that moment, as they watched the lion's silent vigil, it wasn't just Makan's story they were witnessing. It was the shared story of all those who had experienced the healing power of animals and of the quiet, enduring legacies that we leave behind. And so, the lion's tribute continued. Each visit, each moment spent by the grave, another chapter in the unspoken tale of love, sacrifice, and remembrance. The Serengeti, vast and untamed, had long been a place of survival. But now, it was a place of connection. A place where the bond between man and animal, once thought to be fleeting, had become eternal. The days that followed were filled with stories, whispered across the savannah, about the remarkable bond between a retired ranger and the lion who never forgot him. It wasn't just the rangers or the locals who felt the weight of that connection. Even the occasional tourist, who had come to see the famous wildlife of the Serengeti, couldn't help but be moved. There was something powerful in the way the lion sat by the grave, something that transcended species and language, an understanding that was both ancient and timeless. It was a story that, once heard, stayed with you, gnawing at your heart like a powerful, unshakable truth. In every corner of the reserve, people began to reflect on their own relationships with animals. The stray dog who had been saved from the side of the road, the cat adopted from shelter, the rescue birds that found refuge in the forest. Each story, in its own way, echoed the one that had unfolded on these very grounds. The bond between humans and animals wasn't just about rescue or survival. It was about something deeper, mutual respect, loyalty, and a shared history that defied words. The lion, standing guard over Makan's final resting place, became the symbol of all that was pure in that relationship. Elijah, often seen at the gravesite, would stand silently beside the lion, knowing that his mentor's legacy had been sealed not by the ranger's actions alone, but by the reverence of the animal he had saved. He had watched the lion's tribute unfold, and now it was his responsibility to carry the story forward. It wasn't just a memory of the past. It was a living testament to the power of compassion and sacrifice. And with each passing day, as the lion's vigil continued, that lesson grew stronger, its roots digging deeper into the hearts of those who heard it. The Serengeti, vast and untouched, had witnessed many stories of survival, of animal miracles, and of pet heroes. But none were quite like this one. It was a story not of what had been lost, but of what had been given, a reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, love and loyalty could find a way to thrive. And as the lion continued to visit Makan's grave, the Serengeti had one more tale to tell, a tale of a bond that would never be forgotten. Isn't it incredible how animals can surprise us with their depth of feeling? This story is just one of many emotional pet stories that remind us of the profound connection we share with the creatures we rescue and care for. Just like the lion's silent tribute, we all have moments in our lives where loyalty, love, and respect transcend words. So what does this story mean for you? How can you apply the lessons of compassion and respect in your own life? Maybe it's time to take action and make a difference for a stray animal in need. Or perhaps it's time to open your heart to the healing power of pets. If this story inspired you, then don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and keep learning how we can make the world a better place for both humans and animals alike. Let's honor the legacy of love and connection that we all have the power to create.